So when we look at economic systems, we're looking at basically three broad economic systems. But basically, before we decide about what are those three broad economic systems are, let's just quickly define economic systems. So an economic system is basically, we say, is an institutional framework, is a broad institutional framework uh, within which economic activity takes place and scarce resources are allocated between competing users. This, I believe, is a very good definition because it helps us understand it's a framework. It's not it's a system which will provide some guideline into how do we end up allocating our scarce resources, and therefore the fact that we want to find an approach to allocating resources, because we know this that because resources are um, because resources are scarce, there has to be a way to allocate them. So the way to allocate them is found through these economic systems. Make sense? So what's the key job of an economic system is to provide you an institutional framework that can help you allocate your scarce resources, which is an important thing for any economy to begin with. So if you look at economic systems out there, there are three broad sort of um, distinction of economic systems, or there are three broad economic systems that are out there. One is what you call your command economy, command economy. Another one is your mixed economy. And the last one is what you call a free market economy. Free market, MKT means market economy. And if you look at this, when you go from command economy to free market economy, you're going from very high government intervention to almost no government intervention. So from here to here, if you look at it, it becomes a spectrum where very high government intervention to almost no government intervention. So what I'm trying to say here, guys, is this: that as I move from very high government intervention to almost no government intervention, this means that the economic systems are primarily looked into how much is government making decisions of allocation of resources um, versus how much your firms are making decisions. So that's what I'm trying to say. When it comes to resource allocation, it's we want to know who is deciding that resource allocation. Is it government only? Is it firms only? Or is it mix of both government and firm? When it comes to government or firm deciding, therefore, how to allocate resources, they first need to answer these three economic questions. The three economic questions are imperative because they help us allocate resources and therefore useful in that context. So what are the ways the government or what are the sort of three economic questions that are out there that needs to be answered? Well, so we say the first question that needs to be answered is what to produce. What to produce basically means, are we making more of capital goods? Are we making more of consumer goods? Or are we making a bit of both? And so on and so forth. So an economy, because they can't make everything, they need to decide the mix of goods and services, right? And because you cannot produce everything, we need to uh, be wise in our decision making, because we don't want to make more of something that is not needed. And if you get to answer this question, basically, then from a PPC context, let's say if I put this decision where I put capital goods here, and let's say consumer goods here, will be about, should I be at point A? Should I be at point B? Should I get more of consumer goods? Should I get more of capital goods? So the first question the government has to answer is basically, where do they have to be on the PPC? Closer to B, closer to consumer goods, closer to capital goods, or be in the middle somewhere. And what do you guys think this will depend upon? This decision of where to be on the PPC will depend upon what? So guys, in short, what to produce basically is a decision that will depend on the demand of the economy or demand of the goods and services. Also, it would depend upon simply, another important thing would be, it depends on the country's priorities. If the country wants to make more consumer goods, or country wants to make capital goods, and so on and so forth, right? Because if you make more capital goods, then you may have economic growth in the future, but you may not see you to benefit in terms of higher standard of living today. So this decision has an implication in terms of economy's standard of living today versus tomorrow. Then comes what we call how to produce. When you look at how to produce, we're looking at basically, should we be more capital intensive? Should we be more consumer intensive, and so on? So capital versus consumer intensive I'm sorry, no, capital versus capital intensive versus labor intensive. So should you be capital intensive versus labor intensive? Because you could be producing goods that are more labor intensive versus you could be producing more goods which are capital intensive. For example, if you look at China, when it began to focus on manufacturing, tried to focus more on the labor intensive goods. And the reason was very simple. The availability and the cost of labor was really, really cheap for them. So a key consideration when it comes to making decisions regarding how to produce will depend on the idea that you look at your own availability and cost of input, right? And if you get this decision right, by the way, if you are choosing the right kind of resources to make goods and services, then you will be, one would argue, using your resources as efficiently as possible. And that would mean basically um, you won't be under the curve, but you will be on the curve. So being on the curve would require you to get this question right, because then you are looking at your resources properly and you are employing them properly, and then you are on the curve rather than under the curve. So the third question we need to ask is basically, for whom to produce? And this is also an important question, because are we producing it for everyone, or are we producing it for only those who have the money? So a very important sort of moral aspect, a very important ethical questions, that the question that we need to ask is basically, should we have the distribution of resources to be equal, or should we give it to those who can pay more? So like, for example, if you look at UK, education and healthcare is free, right? But if you look at countries like US, healthcare is, for example, not free. And there's a decision therefore a country is making, where some people believe that probably healthcare is the right of individuals. It saves people's life and it should be given for free. While in other countries, they could say that, hey, it's expensive good. Those who can afford should be able to buy it. Otherwise, tough luck. So the idea goes this, that we know this, we cannot satisfy every individual's want. And therefore we have to make a decision about how much of each person's want are to be satisfied. A good way is through market forces of demand and supply. They will give you a price. The higher the price, the less the people will be able to buy the good. The lower the price, the more the people will be able to buy the good. And the price, we'll soon see, depends on basically how scarce the resources are. If a resource is very scarce, you may see a lot less people will be able to buy it, because it's something which is going to have a high price. Like diamonds are not owned by everyone; it's a scarce resource. Makes sense? On the other hand, if it's not so much of a scarce resource, then the price will be low. But there could also be another economy which may say that, hey, we want to have an equal share. What if you're an economy that is trying to have an equal share? In that case, you may not care about basically people's ability, but you may care about if there is somebody out there who needs to have the good and it can save people's life, it should be given to them irrespective of whether they can pay or not. So education, for example, is given in many countries that are developed countries for free, and that is, they also give high quality education. A good example of this is Finland, where the quality of education is pretty high and quality of schools is pretty high, but it's given for free and it is considered as human right to give it for free. Make sense? So that is basically for whom to produce. Are we making it for everyone or are we making it for some? So on a broader level, we need to decide whether everyone is going to have more or less an equal share or whether some will have more than the others. And in this, we say decision, the moral aspect of decision making is important, because what is government redistribution policy? The redistribution of wealth, is it like everyone has to have the same amount, or some can be really, really rich and other can be really, really poor? And the moral aspect, why I'm saying moral aspect, is because there's no right and wrong. It's your view of what is right, what is wrong, that needs to be considered. So in short, guys, when we look at economic resource allocation, we need to answer three questions. What to produce, which means, should we make more of apples? Should we make more of bananas? Should we make more of capital goods? Should we make more of military goods or consumer goods, and so on? The second question is, how to produce. Should we be more labor intensive or capital intensive? And the last one is, for whom to produce. Should we make it for everyone or should we make it for few people? And answering these questions is basically going to be fundamental in us understanding whether we are looking at command economy, free market economy, or mixed economy. So the first economic system that we look at is free market economy. So what I'll try to do is introduce free market economy in this lecture, and we'll continue this discussion in the next lecture and so on. So in a free market economy, we say it's the one where households and firms are the basic owners of factors of production, and they want to act on maximizing their self-interest, which means their own individual benefit, and through markets they try to answer the three economic questions of what, how, and for whom to produce. In other words, the role of government is very, I would say, very minimal. Not completely gone, but very minimal, and we'll see why. So what are the key players in this market? The key players are consumers, you and I, who are buyers of goods and services, producers who are making those goods and services, owners of factors of production who are basically giving those factors of production so that goods can be produced, and they are owning land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And guys, they expect return in that by giving you these factors of production. So if you're a landowner, you expect to receive some rent. If you're labor, you expect to receive some wages. If you're capital, you expect to receive some profits. If you're capital, you expect to receive some interest. And if you're enterprise, you expect to receive some profits. So all of these owners of factors of production are hoping that they will get returns for the resources that they're giving to other people to use. There is not much of examples out there of a pure free market economy. US is an example of a very close free market economy. Another a good example of a very high free market economy. It's difficult to find pure examples. A lot of these countries are closer towards mixed sort of form. A good example of command economy could be Cuba, for example, or some people also say North Korea. where the government is controlling complete sort of resources in North Korea's case. But it's difficult to find a pure free market economy, because a pure free market economy will assume there's no government, or very, very small limited government. Why are there many free market economies? This is a very good question to ask. And the answer to this is that it's really difficult to be completely free, just like it's very difficult to be completely command economy, because you will soon see the kind of ideas that we'll discuss, that it requires some government intervention is needed, because you require government to fix the system. The system is broken, so you've got to sort of have government to continuously intervene and fix wherever necessary. Okay, so what are the motivations of in a free market economy? And we say this, that the key motivation is maximization of self-interest. So maximization of self-interest basically mean that economic actors, which we just discussed, those economic actors like your producer, consumers, and owners of factors of production, are motivated by pure self-interest. They want to maximize their own benefit or self-interest, and their decisions is based on private gains. So, for example, if you look at me as a provider of labor, I will go to the employer who gives me the maximum possible salary. Similarly, somebody who is owning a land will give it to somebody who's going to provide them the maximum possible rent. And so every one of us are trying to maximize our self-interest, and we're looking at doing it through markets. We believe that, Adam, that's a good question. Adam, that's a good question, that the government has very, very little say. In our model, we see there is some say, and I'm going to talk about this in a little while, but government has very little say about it. So consumers are maximizing their satisfaction. Producers are maximizing their profits. Owners of factors of production are maximizing their wages, rent, profit, and interest. And government, if there is a role there, will want to maximize social welfare, people's benefit as a society. Okay. When you look at ownership, and this is where I will talk about government's sort of intervention. So the government is basically trying to protect what we call property rights. And I'll give you an example. We believe in a free market economy. The ownership of assets is completely in the hands of private individuals. So when private individuals own these resources, then the government, through its legal system, through police, through laws, try to make sure that the property rights are upheld. What do we mean by this? Basically, what we mean to say here is this, that, for example, let's say if I'm driving a car, somebody comes and tries to steal that car, and if, let's say, the car is successful, will I be able to get my car back? And the answer is yes, hopefully. I can report it to the police will find the guy, the car, and through the legal system, I can get my car back. So the idea goes this, that the property rights are basically your right of a property, and that needs to be upheld too. And therefore, government helps us doing so in a free market economy. So we believe government's limited role in a pure free market economy will be only to uphold property rights. Make sense? Any questions, guys? So on this note, I'm going to end my class. So that's the first part. I'm going to start with free enterprise tomorrow, where we will discuss not only free enterprise, but also look at how the government then intervene to, or how the free market is answering the questions of what, how, and for whom to produce. Okay, so that will be something that will be discussed in the next lecture.